Hello and welcome to Interface. I'm Simpiwe Ngongwane, standing in for Tembisa Magele. Now, after weeks of public outcry over the state capture report, Eskom CEO Brian Molefe has resigned. He says his resignation is not an admission of guilt, but in the interest of Eskom and the public. And the Democratic Alliance's motion of no confidence was rejected by the ANC again. But then before we get into this discussion, let's recap on the General Secretary at the South African Communist Party, Blade Nziman's statement at its Red October campaign.
This thing, your auto comrade Pravin may be charged again. And this thing that, amongst others, the comrade Ukwete, Amahawks are after him, is completely out of order. We want to say today, as the SACP, we are drawing the red line. Enough is enough in the abuse of state.
Now, here to make sense of these developments, I'm joined by one of the ANC's alliance partners, the second Deputy General Secretary at the South African Communist Party, Solly Mapaila. And you can join this discussion on Facebook, Interface on SABC, and Twitter, Interface on SABC. Mr. Maila, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great chatting to you. Now, yes, so much has been said about the state of capture report, and heads certainly will roll once the Commission of Inquiry is done with this investigation. Now, clearly you'd hoped the state capture report nails President Zuma, his son Tutuzane, the Guptas, Des van Rooyen, Minister Msebenzi Zwane. Am I right or wrong?
We never wished for it. What we wanted was the truth, particularly around the involvement of the Guptas in particular, but we had called for a wide-range state capture, corporate state capture investigation, which will not only target on the Guptas, but all others who have existed through undue influence on state institutions. But in particular, the issue we have raised was because of the misconduct we thought was taking place of the Guptas. And I think that already from the synopsis of the report, we are quite vindicated by it.
So you were expecting a particular outcome of this report, isn't it?
We wanted answers. Of course, there was not enough time for the public protector to deal with this. And you'll know that she focused specifically on the influence around ministerial appointments. And of course, there were other issues related to their contracts in Eskom and other areas, Dinel and so forth. So that area, it's okay, but it doesn't cover the entirety of corporate capture of the state, which is what we've actually raised. In fact, that deals with beyond just, for instance, the Guptas. Of course, the issue is a serious one because they've now blunted the capacity of state-owned enterprises to lead the developmental needs as propagated by our own resolutions of the African National Congress, Mangaung Conference, and even other components of the alliance, which talks to the notion of radically speeding up transformation of our society to end inequalities in the field of whether it's national inequality, that is racism, whether it's gender inequality, fighting against patriarchy, or whether it's about class inequality, leveling the gap between the rich and the poor. All that will be kissed goodbye if the instruments that we are supposed to use them to achieve that, like state-owned enterprises, are now captured by individuals for self-interest and gain. And that's what we wanted to investigate so that we can protect these institutions. And of course, in the process of us doing that fight, we also found that the people in the Treasury were similarly involved in a similar fight to protect the looting of state institutions through what one may call legal corruption in this form. A normal process is followed, but is already decided outside the process. But because it is put through a normal process, it's regarded as having passed through the relevant channels and so forth. Therefore, it's appropriate.
Right.
And we have actually found that there was too much undue influence in this regard. That's the point that we wanted investigated. In fact, at the time we made this call, we had said to the president that he has the right and the choice to set his terms of reference, and he chose not to. Now, the public protector has come out and actually made a clear recommendation in this regard, with regard even on the composition of the commission that she said must be
So,
set
Mr.
up.
Brian Molefe's resignation, is that what you had hoped for? Are you anticipating that some more people who are implicated in this report will resign as well?
Yeah, it's our wish that people must do the right thing and leave. And I think that it also assists the institution for them not to have undue influence against investigation. And we hope that this is a good lesson to all others. It doesn't matter how good you are. If you benefit unduly from state processes or from state institutions at the expense of the South African public, you really have to face the consequences. And we hope that others like him, who have been involved in other sections of state-owned enterprises, like in Denel, for instance, in Transnet, IDC, and so forth, those who have just been given state resources to the Guptas and their cronies, must actually face the music. In fact, we're
So
not
you
surprised.
believe that his resignation was an admission of guilt on his part?
Not necessarily that he can admit guilt. Many of them don't want to admit guilt, but I think that it was quite clear that it will catch up with him, and this is what has happened.
So you are happy that he eventually stepped down?
We are happy that he has actually stepped down. In fact, we are happy that there's now people who are feeling the heat and are leaving, because they know they can't go on like this, think that they can live on the wealth of South Africans unduly without working for it, and think that we'll just fold our hands and leave it like that. So it is in this which, importantly for us, it sends a clear message to all others in other state-owned institutions and in government departments that our task and our job is to serve the people of South Africa and nothing else.
Now, the SACP has regularly criticized the ANC as dismissing state capture as just a minor issue. Now, you are insinuating that the ANC has been complicit in the state capture, isn't it?
It's not to insinuate. Certain leaders in the ANC, of course, have been complicit in this regard. For instance, you'll see, if you go through the whole report, many records of undue participation at levels that are not required to be involved in those processes, ministerial interventions and so forth, things that are not actually required, because other role players are then sidelined on the basis that they have no access to senior offices in the country. And it is that we think must accord the ANC now the opportunity to clean itself, to clean those it has deployed in government, because if they do misconduct, the misconduct doesn't reflect only on them, but it reflects back on the bigger organization, which has got millions of members and supporters, and they lose confidence in the organization if those kind of things are not attended to. So we hope it has elevated the issues. Now they are in a position to can act on those issues.
Now, the Judicial Commission will release probably the findings maybe next year, sometime around in June. And if the Commission finds that the President was complicit, or maybe other senior figures within the ANC, would you support the ANC, bearing in mind that it will be 6 months away from its elective conference?
Well, it will depend on what the ANC does with those who are affected. For instance, we have, through the Constitution, on the basis of the mandate of the ANC, conferred on the President a rare honor to have the prerogative right to be our President and have a tool we call the prerogative right, in which he uses to appoint senior people in government, in state organs, and so forth. If that, which is what the report was, investigation was actually about, if that found that he didn't protect that prerogative right, he didn't honor it, he decided to use it as a tool of patronage in order that he can control individuals and people instead of collectively harnessing the capacity of our organization to deliver the mandate of the revolution. If we feel that he has reached that space and he didn't protect it, he had allowed either his friends to abuse it or himself has abused it, then we'd have no choice but to actually ask them to relieve him of his duties.
Now,
and
so
in that
hold
case,
your
if they
thought.
don't,
Hold your thought. We'll take a break, and we'll be back with more right after this. Well, our conversation continues right here on Interface, and we're talking about state capture. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. And if you've just joined us, we're talking about state capture with the SACP's Soli Mapaila. Well, our conversation continues, Mr. Mapaila. Now, the ANC has tried to separate its own brand from that of President Jacob Zuma. Now, earlier in the year, the SACP has threatened mass action against state capture. How is that going?
Well, we are trying our mobilization. Obviously, we have asked the unions, particularly COSATU affiliates, or even the federation itself, to put up a Section 77 at NEDLAC in order to have this discussed at a higher level in NEDLAC, and we mobilize workers in the state-owned institutions to protect these institutions, because these are the institutions of all South Africans. So the mobilization is going all right.
All right. Now, this year's Red October campaign was titled, I'm going to quote it, "Rebuild Our Movement's Contact with and Leadership in Our Communities and Workplaces." And one of the areas you highlight, of course, is the issue of state capture. And there's been a groundswell in the number of people, including the SACP, talking about state capture or corporate capture. Now, do you get a sense that the ANC, NEC is listening to this?
They will certainly have to listen. They would have no choice not to listen, because we have been rudely awakened by the outcomes of the local government elections, where our people had responded differently, and they've sent a clear message to us to do deeper reflection. If we pay lip service to that, what they were saying, they will definitely punish us much more. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us in the movement, as leaders and as members, to humble ourselves and go to communities, engage with them, understand where we committed mistakes and deal with those mistakes. It's not good enough to point out that there's a problem of corruption but do nothing about it. To point out there's a problem of factionalism and do nothing about it. You can't convince the people that you are a credible organization if your only duty is to analyze and leave the analysis without doing anything.
If the ANC doesn't listen to you, what then?
Well, we have many options as a Communist Party. Firstly is that we have always been an independent organization. Of course, we have harnessed our capacity to consolidate the movement through mobilizing for the ANC when it comes to elections and so forth. We have already developed discussion documents to the extent that it raises fundamental issues around our revolution. One of them is to contend whether the National Democratic Revolution, this problem to end these inequalities in our society, it's only or can only be driven by the African National Congress. And our view is that not necessarily. And therefore, we're entering that particular space. We're also exploring if we could follow any of the electoral options available.
Now, the SACP has threatened to go alone in the 2019 general elections. So is the Public Protector's report on state capture the final straw for the SACP?
Well, it depends on the level of adverse findings that comes out. If they are true constitutional level adverse findings, and that the prerogative right has been handed over to some individuals to use, and there's no proper remedial action taken by the ANC to protect this institution that actually, through the vote the people have given us, then we'd have no choice but to opt out.
Is that a threat?
It is not a threat, it's the possibility. And our structures are already discussing this possibility.
But then if the ANC, if the SACP leaves the alliance, then the alliance's MPs and members of the legislature will lose their seats. Are you at all worried about that?
Well, not necessarily. In any case, our comrades, and we're not in the alliance for the seats. We're in our alliance to consolidate the capacity to free our people from all manner of inequalities, from poverty, from degradation, to improve their living conditions, for food security, and all of that. So that is not a consideration of an alliance. The alliance is just the capacity, maximized capacity of our revolution to advance the transformational agenda. So if that capacity has been threatened by misconduct of certain leaders or members in the ANC, we have no business to be in a relationship with them.
Now, many South Africans are wondering, will the alliance go beyond just talking to deal with the perception of corruption? Right or wrong?
No. We have to deal with corruption. Corruption is a serious cancer in our society, and we have to deal with it. I mean, corruption is practically stealing from the poor. So we have to deal with it. In fact, we must deal with corruption both in the public and the private sector, so that we can have a proper, upright society, a society that respects the values that are in our own constitution, a society that embraces ethics that are good and for the advancement of all. So it's not a threat. It's a reality that we'd have to engage robustly on this matter. And that's why, as a Communist Party, over the years, we've mobilized a full-blown campaign against corruption. And we've rolled that particular program out throughout the country. Of course, as you know, we also lost some of our members who martyred in this campaign. And we want to continue in their memory to make sure that we root out corruption, particularly from the sectors that we control in the public sector as well as in the private sector.
Now, in the past week, the DA's motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma has clearly been rejected by the ANC. So why does the SACP believe that President Zuma should not be impeached?
Well, the motion was firstly opportunistic. And I think that no party that respects itself could actually use the machinery of the opposition to destroy itself. So we wouldn't give the DA that privilege. No, it was not going to be possible. We ourselves have to reflect and take our own actions that are appropriate and exercise the options that we have taken. But it should not be the opposition telling us practically what to do. The DA has no interest of our people. There's no capacity to transform South African society. It is only interested in the so-called opportunities. We want our people not to just have some mere corner opportunities. We want our democracy to work for everybody, for the working class in the rural areas, in the villages, in the townships, where our people still live in squalor. Majority of the DA members don't live in squalor. They live in opulence, in high-end suburbs, suburbia in South Africa. Mm-hmm. So those people have no regard for the daily sufferings of the people in the township. They may need their vote, but they can't transform the society.
All right. Now, a subject of the day is a state capture. Our conversation continues right after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. Our conversation on state capture continues, and we're joined in studio by the SACP's Soli Mapaila. Well, thank you so much for staying with us, Mr. Mapaila. Now, the SACP constantly refers to the Gupta family as parasites, and there are no alternative to monopoly capital. And you've also called on the workers to stop the Guptarization of the state. So how do workers do that if they're employed by monopoly capital?
Well, what we're saying is that the Guptas, because when we're criticizing them, people told us that they are a small fish in the pond, so we should go for the big fish. And we're saying both the big fish and the small fish are all capitalistic and exploitative in nature. They are not solution. In fact, we're saying the Guptas are no solution to the big fish either, and we're not opting for any of them. We're opting for an egalitarian society, that is a society of equals, a society that guarantees the social well-being of all its citizens based on the wealth of the republic that must be equally distributed across the people. So that's
So you think the Guptas are not the big fish because they've often been accused of running the country?
No, they are the big fish in terms of raiding state institutions, state-owned assets, and state-owned enterprises. And that's why we've said workers in those areas must stand up and reject them from raiding those, because that wealth that they are raiding belongs to the workers, doesn't belong necessarily to the Guptas. And for that matter, they raid this money, they take it outside the country. It's not invested back here to develop our country. So that's the point why we felt that they are part of what we call parasitic capitalists. They are embedded inside using proximity to office, inside state organs. They use the tendering system, contracting system, to actually enrich themselves, but not on the basis largely of competence, but on the basis of association. And that's what we are rejecting. We are rejecting it for the Guptas and for anybody else who operates in that form.
Now, your leader, Mr. Blade Nzimande, says he knows the people or the person who is involved in the politicization of the incrimination of Mr. Gordon's charges. So who is this person?
Well, it's an open secret. I think we all know that. It may not be necessarily appropriate to say that at this moment, but we know that the people that are involved. We've raised it with our leadership comrades in the alliance, and we have said that this thing must come to an end because it destabilizes the politics in the country, and people want to stay in office through abuse of state organs. And if you create a situation where state organs are abused in this form, they will erode the confidence of the rule of law by the people, and ultimately the moral authority of the state will become eroded, and the mafias will emerge, which is largely part of the problem that emerged at SARS, where the protection of the tobacco mafia in the main led to a pursuit of a group of comrades who were doing good job to protect the state and actually to make sure that the mafias, in terms of their illegal trade, they can pay tax in other activities that were known.
This is a matter of public interest, huge public interest, I must add, and we need to know who this person is.
Well, you know, there's a guy there called, is it Matono? So we actually exposed his name, for instance, in our last Central Committee when we discussed this matter. This is a man that, for instance, at some point actually said to have paid the tax woes of Mr. Julius Malema. So those grouping are the ones that they must be dealt with rather than pursue the people who are dealing with them.
What's his name again?
I think it's Malton or something.
Malton.
Maton.
Maton. So
Yeah.
you are saying Maton is responsible for eroding the moral fiber of the NPA and the Hawks to incriminate Mr. Pravin Gordhan?
It's part of the tobacco groupings, mafias in the tobacco industry. That this so-called ROC unit, which is a competent unit of well-meaning South Africans who pursue the mafia at the risk of their life, for us to be protected as South Africans.
Is that your official position? Should I quote you on this?
No, of course.
Right. Now, are the media reports true that you are next in the firing line because you talk too much?
Well, we have been expecting that I'm a spokesperson of the SACP. If I'm talking too much for the SACP, that's okay. And we are not afraid of them coming for us. We'll expect if you are in our space, this is the kind of life that we have to live. But we cannot be intimidated by those. The levels of poverty in our community requires us to speak out to defend their wealth that is now being illicitly traded by tobacco mafias, that is so-called legally handed over to the Guptas and other associates of political leaders in this country. And we have to stand up to speak for South Africans. That's part of our moral obligation and duty.
So if you are subjected to further vitriolic attacks or to a point where you even lose your job, are you going to spill more beans?
No. It has nothing to whether there's protection of job. We're not protecting any jobs. That is why we have spoken out when we think something is wrong, and we'll continue to do that. But there's no association whether we are in parliament or not in parliament, cabinet or not in cabinet. In fact, if you are to look at those comrades who are in parliament or even in cabinet, our members, the majority of them are professionals. They don't need cabinet to live. They can survive outside cabinet. They are not in the revolution for cabinet positions. They have given their lives over the years to sacrifice for the liberation of our country. In fact, it's an insult to think that their participation in cabinet must be made as if they are beggars. No, those are revolutionaries in their own right. They were committed by their own conscience. No single individual on the basis of appointing them to cabinet brought them into the liberation struggle. They joined voluntarily by themselves. So they must be treated as such like all other revolutionaries.
Now, briefly, Soli, there is a perception that the SACP is actually sitting on the fence and waiting for the ANC to implode, and it is then that the SACP will strike. Could this be a way that the SACP is perhaps trying to break ranks with the ANC?
No. We have always said that our first prize, even at the cost of our own political independence, is to protect and build the African National Congress, to defend it and advance our revolution headed by the African National Congress. But if when the African National Congress is committing mistakes and we keep on alerting it to these mistakes and it's looking the other way around, we would have no option because the people will ultimately see no difference between us and the African National Congress. And when they erode it, they will also erode us. And that will be too much unfair to the majority of South Africans, to the sacrifices of our leaders who have fought, who have died, who have martyred for the freedom of this country. it will not be correct for us to actually look the other way around just for conveniency and not talk against the wrongs that are taking place. It is on that particular basis that we've spoken out as the SACP. We're not wishing the ANC to die. Our first prize is to save the African National Congress if it is savable. But if its leadership is reluctant to save itself, we will opt to the South African people to save it.
Now, tell you what, we'd need another hour for this conversation, but then I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. But then thank you so much. It's been great chatting to you.
Thank you very much, Simply.
All right, that was the SACP's Solly Mapaila speaking to our show tonight, Interface. And that's how we end our program this week. From the rest of the team here, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye from Johannesburg.